Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. My guest today is fantastic. As always, she's an elementary school teacher, a reading specialist, locally, has great insights into raising boys, working with boys, specifically in reading, but all children, obviously, and also what's going on with the plight of our academic system. She was wonderful to talk to. Without further ado, the woman, the myth, the legend, Shannon Mundelius. And the light is red. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing swimmingly. This beverage is just hitting the spot.
It's really tasty.
I feel like every time I meet with somebody at the end of the week, I'm like, God, it was a long week. But it feels like every week is
every week is a long week. I think everybody was feeling it today. My students, my own kids, my kids' teachers.
Right.
I felt like everybody was sort of giving a little bit more leeway of, what do you think? Should we require this X, Y, and Z on this assignment, or maybe step it back a little bit?
You know what it's like? I feel like the end of every week is the end of watching a Mel Gibson Mad Max movie. Like, you've gone through such an experience. You feel exhausted for them. You're like scarred, you're tattered, and you're just like driving off onto the horizon, just going where, who knows,
where.
But like, you've survived this horrific experience only to recover and be thrown into another one.
Seriously. And this is a short week for us in education because there's no school tomorrow. So.
Well, the good news is we're only going shelter in place for 2 weeks, and then we'll be back.
And we'll be back.
And then we'll be back.
Yes.
So don't even worry about it. Like, it's just gonna be like a family vacation.
It's fine.
It'll be fine.
We can do it. We can do this. We can do hard things. It's fine. Yes.
Okay, but there's hard. Like, okay, do you get flu shots?
My whole family's getting them the first time tomorrow.
Hey,
Ever.
good for you.
Ever.
Good for you. I generally don't because I cry. Like,
the questions that I'm getting from my kids is ridiculous. Like, where are we going? Why aren't we going to the doctor's office? It's gonna hurt. I'm like, oh my God.
Well,
Stop.
Let me tell you this. There are hard things. Like, I'd rather take a 2x4 to the face than get a needle piercing my skin, because I feel like it pierces your soul, I mean,
I don't know. I guess I haven't had a shot in a long time, so maybe I can definitely overcompensate on the fear and just say you're going to be fine, knock it off. But they are the ones that have had shots more recently than me, so maybe I won't be fine.
Maybe you won't be.
Maybe I will cry.
Maybe they will be there for you.
They'll hold my hand.
The last time I got a shot, I think it was my son was being born, my last son, who's 4 now. So obviously 4 years ago, I had to get the shot because I had to get like a whooping cough booster or something like that, right? So they tell me I have to do this. I'm like, oh.
Somebody come with me.
Right. So I go to the doctor's office, and they're like, okay, sit in this room. I'm like, okay. So I sit in the room. I'm wearing a sweater. I take the sweater off. I'm wearing a button-up shirt, long sleeve. Take that off. And I'm sitting there, and I literally have to just cover my eyes. So I'm sitting in this room, covering my eyes, and I hear the door open, and this woman says, hello. And I say, hey, listen, I can't look at you. I can't look at what you're doing. I just want you to do it and then tell me when it's over. And she literally was like this silent assassin. She came up, it's like, quick pinch, boom, shots in, shots out, left. I don't know what she looks like.
And how was it? You didn't even...
Oh, no, I cried all the way home. Oh. But my point is, I don't even know what the woman looked like.
She was so stealth. Well, because you weren't looking at
her.
And
because I didn't have the guts to look the woman in the eyes as she was puncturing my left, delt, whatever that thing is. Yeah, it's a little embarrassing.
I tell my kids not to look.
If I may ask, this is a really personal question, but why haven't you gotten them? Now, mind you, this is coming from somebody who doesn't get them regularly.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Because I've always reasoned that we're really healthy people, and none of my family have ever really gotten the flu. And so I've sort of felt like I'm not anti-vax whatsoever, but I've just felt like we've never really had an issue, and that we'd kind of keep rolling the dice until we did. But what's changed my mind is listening to different epidemiologists that I would have never listened to before in my life talk about how getting the vaccine doesn't only just protect me, it protects the other people that I'm around. And I figured it's a simple thing we can do that's not going to hurt any of my family, but it could help other people.
Are you really telling me that you're starting to get this thing because you think you could help other people.
Absolutely.
That is, I mean, like, I did not think that anything good would ever come out of this besides, like a boom in circle lighting sales and then, other stuff. But you're actually feeling more compassion for those around you.
I think a lot of people are feeling that way too. And I've convinced my parents to get a flu shot when they never have before, and other people, just kind of for the greater good.
That's a beautiful thing. Yeah. That's a beautiful thing. Good for you.
So easy. And
it is.
I mean, it's a no-brainer.
It is. So what age of kids do you teach?
I teach 1st through 5th grade, all grades, all 5 grades, and I do reading intervention, which is helping struggling readers. So the structure of my program is I see the same groups of kids in each grade level 3 days a week for about an 8-week cycle until we can reassess and see where kids are, if they can move out or stay in or need to be more seriously looked at to see if there's other issues going on.
Your bracelets keep hitting that table. They're bad? Fantastic.
Is it making noise?
A little bit. It's not bad.
Okay.
Just there you go. Just the left hand. Yeah. That's awesome.
So it's a really, normally it's a really rewarding job. This year is really, really rough. I'm trying, the silver lining is just working with kids and seeing kids, and I have some kids just this week that are staying on the Zoom longer just to show me their Legos and chit chat and that sort of thing, and tell me really sweet things like, Mrs. Mundelius, I really love working with you, and like those are the silver linings that are happening right now. It's hard to feel like we're making progress.
Right. It is exceedingly difficult. I had a student in here. Oh, this was a really sad story. I had a student in here recently. He was doing super well. Okay, like crushing. He would come in, he would sit down, he'd correct his homework. And mind you, I can't pull up in front of him. So, obviously I'm sitting at my desk and the kids are only like 6 feet away, but I can't get in front of him and I'm not saying, here, hand me your homework, let me correct it.
Right.
So he does all of these corrections. He's doing so well that I say, hey, look, we should really cut off one of your classes. Because he had signed up for the full program, but I said, look, you're doing well enough. Skip next week. We'll prorate it. We'll make this happen. Because if somebody's coming in and only missing one question on the homework, I'm like, hey, man.
You might not be fully necessary.
let's be reasonable here, right?
Yeah.
So I talked to his mom, and I convinced her. I said, look, you guys don't need to pay for the full 9-session program. He's almost getting perfects on everything. Let's go from there. So she gets a hold of me after the whole thing's over, and she says, I think he may have cheated. I was like, what?
Oh.
And all of a sudden, I was like, wait, what do you mean? And she tells me, she's like, well, he's done it before. And obviously, I've never met this kid before my SAT prep.
Yeah.
And my heart just kind of dropped because I was like, God, man. And she said, is this possible? Now, under normal circumstances, as I move in front of the kids, because that's what I do, I just rotate around the room. If they've done math homework and they only missed one question, well, look, if you don't have any work written down in your book, I can see, okay, where's your work? You got number 20 right. That's the hardest question in the book. Where's your work? You can't have done it on your calculator. You can't have done it in your head. I know this.
Right.
And so then they have to fess up, oh, okay. And I kind of beat it out of them, but they usually admit it. With this kid, if he sat across the room, I couldn't pull up in front of him.
You can't see that immediate. Yeah.
Right. So it's when you say, hey, it's really hard to know if you're making progress in the absence of these really sweet kind of like, oh, I really love working with you. And I get some positive feedback from parents, but it's super difficult. Like, it's terrifying now when I work with students. It's like, well, did you really only miss one?
Right.
And I don't want to call him a liar.
Yeah.
And sometimes I do, but only when I really know the kid.
Sure.
But if it's a quiet kid, it's like, well, I'm just going to have to take your word for it. Right.
Yeah.
What are you guys doing in order to track that? Or is it just kind of one of those things where you have to hope for the best?
So in normal times,
times
when I have a kid, I have 5 kids sitting at my table, I can give immediate corrective feedback. And then in general, what I do is after they leave my session is I write down a whole bunch of anecdotal notes about my observations. And so what's happening now is I'll ask them to do a task, and pretty much everything we do is a solicit and a response, whether it's writing or verbal. And so I can get verbal things from kids, obviously, but that's not so much the meat of the work. It's a lot of times how that's transferring to their writing and that process of hearing, speaking, writing, all those things together. And so what I'm doing right now is they'll have them write on a whiteboard or a piece of paper, hold it up to their video, and I'm screenshotting their little square and then kind of cataloging and organizing that data, if you will. Then using that so conference week is coming up next week, and I sent teachers notes with a little piece of information about what I've seen so far and what we've done, and maybe some screenshots, and say, give them some information on progress or more needs.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough.
And usually by now I have a stack of papers from each kid and with my notes all over it that I can rifle through and pinpoint very specific skills that are either mastered or not, and kind of continue from there. And I have almost none of that now.
Gosh.
Because also we have the technology that I'm working through also. It's it just doesn't, each day, sometimes kids show up, sometimes they don't show up. And normally it was 4 days a week, every week, without a hitch. And so, I don't know. Sometimes they have people walking around in the background, see people asking them what they want for lunch during our 25-minute session.
You know what's so frustrating, too? It's not, everything you said, yes. But the other thing is, it may be over in 2 weeks. It may be over in 4 months.
It's definitely not going to be over in 2 weeks.
Okay, perhaps that was an exaggeration. But
don't make me wishful. Stop it. That's not okay.
God, could you imagine if all of a sudden everybody just started working together?
Flip the switch.
And we all put in our minds and said, okay, look, these are the problems. This is the top 5 problem list, right? Yeah. And who can identify solutions? Let's get top 3 solutions for each of these problems, and let's iron it out and go from there.
And make it happen.
By the way, let's fix it on the fly. Yeah. This is actually a really interesting... I interviewed one of the Board of Education candidates, Kumar.
Yep.
Okay. He's running for Zone 3. He was very interesting because he was talking about bringing a technologically based problem-solving method to the table. And I didn't want to dive too deeply into it.
Yeah.
But there's an old paradigm of problem solving, which was GM 1950, 1960, right? And what you did is you thought of all of the possible problems, you solved those as best you could, and you put it out into the world. And there's your, car, whatever it happened to be. Yeah. Okay. And there has been a massive shift in problem solving methodology, not just in the automotive world, but it was very tech driven, because when you put out a vehicle, you had to wait for feedback to come back. And that could take months, it could take years, it could take, whatever.
Yeah.
And so once you had that, you compiled all of those issues and you made the next year's model. So your revisions are on an annual basis.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Tesla actually took all of the information and they started doing 3-month revisions because they were able to get information in real time from what was going on with the cars. And in fact, if you're driving one, you can hit this button and report a problem on the spot.
Because it has so much
Because
technology.
It has tech.
Yeah.
And then you go deeper into tech. My brother actually did the tech for this company called Deliveroo. My brother's this freaky genius, right? So he flunks out of Ignatia Valley High School, and then he gets his PhD from Princeton.
School wasn't for him for a while.
God, you know what's so frustrating? I did everything right.
Right.
I was, I did all my classwork. I was in sports. I was in music. I worked. I volunteered. I did all of these things. And I went to Cal, and I was very happy to go to Cal and study. He flunks out of high school, and then he gets a PhD from Princeton. Because just to stick in my eye. No. Anyway, so
brothers.
Brothers. Right. It was in the Bible. Cain and Abel understand. Anyway, the point is, he works for this company, Deliveroo. It's like Uber Eats. Okay, he was the chief tech officer. So what he did was streamline the process. So essentially when he came on, they said, okay, this is the problem. We have the restaurants And when you make an order, somebody in the restaurant has to physically go over and hit a button to accept the order, and then they have to hit another button when the order's ready.
Yep.
You have the delivery person who has to hit a button to accept an order. They have to figure out on their own which order would be best to take based on distance and quantity.
Yeah.
And then they have to hit a button when it's ready, when they pick it up, and when they drop it off. So there are all these buttons. And then you have, of course, the eater, the consumer, right? Who has to have the best streamlined, fastest, most tasty experience.
Right.
So what they did is he streamlined all that so nobody hit any buttons. They wrote algorithms to determine what would be the fastest and most profitable order for that delivery person on the spot. And the restaurant, instead of having them hit buttons when it was accepted order and ready, they estimated based on the restaurant's history and all these other things.
Yeah.
So the point is, he revised that on a daily basis. They figured out ways to run it in real time, take the data that night, compile it, fix it, upload a new version the next day, and keep fixing the algorithm.
Wow.
And so my point is, if we came to the table instead of the 1950 GM problem-solving method, which is like, let's think of all the problems, and then that's all you get for this whole year. If we just came to the table saying, hey, look, at the end of the day, every day for the first 2 weeks, I want you to upload your top 5 issues. And by the end of the second or third week, if we're doing our jobs right, if we have somebody compiling the issues at night and then somebody staying up late trying to find solutions, we could have a far more effective process. We just have to go through that pain of the first 2 or 3 weeks. But after that, we should be good to go.
Yeah.
Why aren't we doing this?
In the rest of the world, that makes total sense. In education, I just don't. That unfortunately is not been my experience.
Why not?
I think the bureaucracy, the red tape, because there's the first factor of financial consequences or budgeting issues, that sort of thing, and then you have your labor unions, and then you have your actual people, and everybody has a voice. And education, people in education are people that feel, in general, have feelings about all the things and lots of things, and don't really like that to be dismissed. And so I think that sometimes the feelings maybe get in the way of making decisions, broad decisions that might affect people and make people unhappy, and then make other people happy as well.
Do you think, let me ask you something, serious question.
Yeah.
Do you think that people are assessing when their feelings are being dismissed or being heard, and the body or the people that are in charge of making the hard decisions are just disagreeing with them? Because I feel like whenever somebody says, hey, you're not hearing my feelings, I don't want to do this, there are times when the response is, no, I heard your feelings. I heard what you want, but we're going to move forward in this other direction.
Right.
And people write that off as, they're not hearing me. It's like, no. You are being heard.
Yeah.
But if we say whatever you feel to each individual person, whatever you feel is what we will do, we would never get anywhere because there are too many different feelings.
Yeah. I think that maybe there was actually a very good example of that this week, where the last school board meeting, they had said and discussed, and everybody agreed on the fact that if and when we got into red, here's the timeline, and we're going to work towards hybrid, and da-da-da-da. And then there was a flood of, I don't know, different methods of gathering people's feelings again. And then it turned out that the school board meeting this week, Dr. Malloy, the superintendent, said, some of you are going to be happy and some of you are not, but here's what we're going to do. So he acknowledged that he heard, I think, in my way, I guess, I feel like he acknowledged that he has listened to and understands people's feelings, and they pretty much range from, everybody should stay at home until there's a vaccination that protects everyone, which is not going to happen, by the way. And then we should get kids back in school full time unencumbered.
The whole spectrum.
The
Take
whole
off
spectrum.
the mask.
Yeah.
Let's go Florida style.
Yeah, right. So I think at least he did that, and there are people that are really angry, and then there's people that are like, "Yay, Dr. Malloy," and I don't know if I'm totally answering your question or not, but I feel like that happened this week.
Here's the thing. I think you are, because at the heart of it, my question is, okay, how are people responding to not getting their way?
Ooh, they're mad.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like one of the responses that people feel like will be received well is, my feelings are not being heard. But what that's actually code for is, they didn't do what I wanted.
I didn't get my way.
I didn't get my way.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, okay, wait. Are people actually not listening to you? Or are they listening to you and the 10,000 other people out there, and then trying to listen to all the people who can't speak for themselves, like the kids, and then trying to listen to the overall governing body of the state and the county? There are so many people to listen to and to hear out that you just hear people getting so enraged over the governing body not going the way that they think it should.
Yeah. I had to pull myself away from
where? From where?
Forums.
Say it. Some forums.
Over the weekend. Or actually, I did it last week before the school board meeting even happened, because I'm in a unique position also, because I'm hearing so much from the teacher side of it, and the hard work that they're doing, and the amount of time it's taking to really deliver their curriculum in a effective, meaningful way and connect with students and all that kind of stuff. So I'm hearing all of that, and it kind of crescendoed like last, Thursday or Friday or something. And I don't know what the specific thing was, but between that and hearing, and not even just here, like across the country, like on different Facebook pages that I'm on, Google Classroom for teachers and stuff like that, where people are just being really honest, the teachers are, about what they're going through. So, and then there's, there's kind of two distinct pages on Facebook that are parents of the SRV USD, that have very strong voices on both sides. And between even just those two, and I kind of try to tickle in and be like, well, I think that this might be what's happening, that teachers are feeling this, and it's not, you can't forget that. You can't lose sight of what is actually happening to those employees in your quest for whatever it is that you want, whether it's fully staying home or whether it's hybrid or whatever it is. And then when it just, it just kept churning and churning, and I was like, okay, I actually have to turn it off, because I feel and see and hear all of it, all the sides, and I can 1 second go with one side and the other second, but I still have it back here with the other side. So I was just like, ugh, the noise. I got to turn it off.
It's too all encompassing. Like
it is, and
it's too
and
overpowering.
It's constant, and it's
yes,
the emotion and the anger and the whatever's coming through is just really tearing at everyone. And that's, again, for myself, I was like, whew, I can't take it any longer. Like, I just need to move away from it. So
I used to try to talk to people online, and it killed me, because I think the last interaction I had was, not proud of this interaction, but I will tell you.
We all have moments of things that we put on there, and then we're like, ooh.
There was this meme going around, or excuse me, not a meme, but a picture of a printed out piece of paper on a bathroom mirror, okay, that said, instead of making girls adhere to a dress code, why don't you stop boys from being pigs, essentially.
Okay. And
it was getting passed around by my high school physics teacher, who's a very, very strong advocate for women, which I appreciate. And, he and I talked about stuff like this at length. And I appreciate where he's coming from. And he had gotten this passed around, and it was something to consider. I was like, oh, that's interesting, whatever. And then I looked in the comments. Again, years ago, I was a different man. So I look in the comments.
You've matured,
I'm a
what?
different person.
Okay.
No, what I realized? I'll explain to you. So. Okay. Goes into it, and then it's essentially just this horrific harangue by a couple people about like how horrendous young men are and how terrible it is. And I made a comment. I said, I'm pretty sure that if you had a young man sitting naked next to a young woman, then she would at least in part be distracted. Now, I'm not telling you it would be appropriate. I'm not telling you it would be great.
Yeah.
I'm not equating women dressing around in camisoles or short shorts as being naked. But what I am saying is we can see there's a spectrum of distraction.
Sure.
And all that I think people are trying to do is say, hey, look, can we all agree on a type of attire that would be good? Because whether or not you like it, people will be distracted. And this woman piped up and she said, well, obviously you're saying that because you're a white male and blah, 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 blah. And I said, listen, first off, I'm not white. Second, you have no idea what it's like to be a teenage boy, right? And third, I find it interesting that a Caucasian female is the first person to devalue an argument based on race and gender.
Yeah.
Right. And she said nothing. She obviously deleted her post and exited. I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? I'm talking to crazy people. So that was the last time I got into it. But you go to those forums that you were talking about, and I've only gotten back on Facebook recently to post, the interviews that I've been doing. But it's so clear that it's like you don't have people communicating necessarily in good faith. You have some people that are just trying to express their feelings and other people that take up the mantle and try to invalidate them. Yeah. And it's kind of like this person just wanted to be heard. Again, I'm not being heard. And then other people respond to it. It's like, just let them say whatever.
Yeah.
It's kind of, have you ever seen The Nail? It's Not About the Nail.
No.
Oh my gosh.
I haven't.
When we're done, you got to Google It's Not About the Nail.
Okay.
It's a 2-minute video.
Tell me about it.
And this woman, well, I'm going to ruin it, but
that's okay.
This woman is sitting there. It's like this black and white, very, very well done shot. And she's sitting there. It's a side profile. And she's like, look, this is terrifying. And you're like, oh my gosh. And it's very quiet. She's like, I just feel this constant pain and this pressure. And it's terrifying. I don't know if it's ever going to go away. I don't know where it's coming from. I mean, this could be the rest of my life.
Right.
I don't know what to do, right? And you're watching this like, oh my God, what's happening?
Yeah.
And it shoots to this guy sitting on the couch next to her going, he's holding his head, and he literally says, do you think it could be the nail in your forehead? And it shoots back to her, and she has this 10-penny nail coming straight out of her head. She's like, you always do this. It's not about, why don't you, you're not listening to me. Yes, it's not about, and he's like, I just think if we pulled it out, she's like, you're not hearing me, right? So all she wants to do, and the skit goes on, but all she wants to do is have somebody hear her and not try to fix it and not try to tell her to be reasonable. She just wants to be heard. And I feel like so much of that is going on these forums where people just want to be heard. And they're like, look, it's just a rant. I'm really frustrated about this. My kid's not happy. His eyes are bloodshot. Gosh, this is really hard. And then people come on like, well, this guy said this and this, blah, 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 and then the argument keeps going.
Yeah. Well, I think they are looking for a fix. They're not looking to only be heard, but there are a lot of voices. It's hard because I try to keep sort of emotion out of it and sort of just post factual things or things that I've heard from a source, because again, I like to only know from a source if I'm going to share something. But there's just a little too much emotion, and there's a little too much negative words, like just even the word harass. When you're talking about emailing somebody about something that you're not happy about, like it just is not, it doesn't work. You can't move forward with that kind of language and hope to be effective and have people listen to you. Have
10,000 people email all at once.
Yeah, and
talk
that's
about
another
an ineffective
thing is that we're in a really unique place, right? Because I sat through board meetings in the past because I was supporting my principal. I knew she was going to speak at a board meeting or something like that. So that's been a reason to go. But never have I've watched every board meeting since the middle of April. Every board meeting, live, and I've never done it before. So I think I'm not unique. I think that many people in our community are watching and paying attention where they never have before. And there's so much to understand about education and how it works to really have a valid opinion, if that makes sense. I mean, everybody's opinion.
Are you saying somebody's opinion isn't valid? Are you saying that?
I'm saying that sometimes opinions aren't based on all the right information or all facts, I guess. And so that is what I'm saying. There's so much that people don't understand about it. So anyways, the engagement of the community is tenfold, right? Because people have more time right now. And it's all online because we can watch the meetings. And so everybody's having a voice and emailing our board, our district people, and kind of coupled with last week and that kind of realization that I needed to cut out the noise just for myself personally, I am realizing that when I'm seeing that Dr. Malloy, our superintendent, is responding to people at 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and giving fairly thoughtful responses, I'm thinking, what is that taking away from the overall ability to spend time on making real decisions and doing the things that we need him to do his job to help our kids?
Right. Well, the number one thing I think he's warding off is having people claim he wasn't listening.
Yeah, and that he's not listening, or that he's not engaged, or all those things, for sure, which God bless him. Like, I think he is responding to everyone.
Or at least trying.
Doing his best. Yeah.
But it's an impossible task. I mean, how many families, how many kids, how many separate sets of parents?
I mean, bazillions. I
right.
can't. And at every twist and turn, people are emailing.
Right. The thing with the emails is curious to me, because in my mind, it's like a communication form of bullying. It's literally like we're screaming at you.
Yeah. There are people that are effective emailers that are saying, I've read this, I've researched that. Here are some ideas to maybe effectively transition into in-person schooling and stuff like that. And I think that's a very effective email, but kind of going off half-cocked, if you will, and complaining and whining and that sort of thing not an effective. And sometimes not every email deserves a response.
Right.
And it just, I don't know. It's really hard, because there are some people that are writing really effective things, or have great suggestions about maybe some ideas that should be considered. But I think they're maybe getting lost in I don't know if there's a system of gathering that information and then really looking at it, or if it's just kind of, okay, I'm going to answer them and we're going to move on, and it's sort of out of their working memory. Right. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Let me be clear. When I said I think it's a form of bullying, I don't think an email is a form of bullying. What I meant is mass emails.
Yeah.
Right. So when you mobilize people and you say, hey, I don't think that the Board of Education understands that we want our kids back in school, let's all send 10 emails and send this to 10 friends and have them send 10 emails, something like that.
Right.
And all of a sudden you have, let's say, 1,000 emails. Now, the goal of that initial communication was, let's get them to pay attention.
Yeah, let them know how we feel.
Right. Let's get our feelings out. And again, you should be working to have your feelings heard. I'm not saying anybody sit by idly.
Yes.
But the problem is exactly what you're saying. Some emails are very thought out. Now, let's say the number of emails, original emails that are very thought out, let's say 1 in 10. Okay. Well, if all of a sudden you have normally 10 very thought out emails in a day out of 100, but instead of having 100 emails, it swells to 1,000, and 900 of those are people that are very exacerbated and very, very intent with getting their emotions across. Well, then those 10 valuable emails get lost.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Again, that's why I was saying it's kind of like bullying. If you have 10 people sitting in front of you and one of them has a good suggestion and you're trying to go from person to person, and then 100 other people walk in and start yelling, you'll never get the one person.
Right.
But that's the nature of the like mob communication at this
Yep.
point.
Yeah, definitely. And it's happening on every side. Guess I even hear it,
Right.
kind of from the teacher's side too. Like,
Oh, 100%.
so
What are you hearing from the teacher's side, if I may ask?
I think it's just often they meaning probably district admin, but it's interesting my learning about this whole process also, because I never knew that at the board meetings, essentially with especially big decisions like these, all the decisions that have come under COVID, is kind of like the district admin, the people that work in that office. This is my perception. I've not vetted it with anyone, but they work together to make a plan. They present that plan to the board, and then the board asks questions. They sort of clarify. They might give some sort of directive, and then the board votes on whether they approve that plan or not. And so the teachers are directing their issues at them. And I'm not sure if it's muddied, because not everybody is watching, understanding the process, seeing who it is that is making the decisions, or that it's the combination. But that admin doesn't understand what's actually happening in the classroom, how their decisions that they make or the things that they're talking about might really have negative kind of domino effects to what teachers actually have to do. And then when board members kind of get involved with maybe not enough information, maybe not enough feet on the ground of actually trying to experience again what is happening, what these decisions, the high level decisions that are being made, and how that affects what really happens on the ground, I think that's where there's a lot of people, a lot of staff that are not happy.
Right. The teachers, the president of the teachers union did come out and say something about not going back to school. The union wouldn't support going back to school until there were 0 cases of COVID, right?
Mm-hmm. And a vaccine.
Okay, so here's a question for you. And this is an impossible question for you to answer. I'm just going to preface it with that.
Okay.
That, to me, seems to be defaulting. Just like we were saying, hey, look, you got to consider everybody's position.
Yep.
Right? That, to me, seems to be a default position to the absolute most conservative in favor of some teachers. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not in favor of all teachers.
For sure.
Because I don't think the teachers, and you could tell me I'm wrong, but I don't think all of the teachers are united in saying we should not see a single student until there's a vaccine that's mass distributed and 0 cases of COVID.
That's correct.
Right? So they are defaulting to one of the most extreme positions that may actually be detrimental to the teachers. I was thinking about this just today, because it's kind of like, okay, look, it's not, the president of the teachers union is trying to do right by the teachers.
Sure.
But doing right by the teachers is a very complex issue.
Yes.
Okay? So just hear me out. If, let's say, by some freak chance, half of the children in the district leave the district for alternate education, is that in the best interest of the teachers who will ultimately be laid off? Mm-hmm. Is that in the best interest of the students that will be coming into the district this following year? Right? There are so many nuances to what's in the best interest of the teachers. Obviously, you want to keep enrollment high. Obviously, you want to keep students safe. Obviously, you want to keep teachers safe.
Right.
Obviously, you don't want to, incur the wrath of the populace.
Yeah.
There are all of these best interest
and
concepts.
Adversely affect their kids' education. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, interestingly that you bring that up, because one of my questions at a meeting recently was, so it was being talked about, the union is very heavily advertising the need for Prop 15 to pass, so that it's taxes on real estate,
Commercial holdings.
commercial real estate, and kind of laying a lot on the line in terms of that passing, and also certain school board members being elected, and then the CARES Act money coming in, and kind of it was said that if those things don't happen, jobs will be lost in San Juan Valley Unified School District. And so that made me say or comment. You can only submit comments through a form. You don't get immediate question answer sort of situation. But so my comment was, can you please speak to the fact that we've lost, I don't know, I hear lots of numbers. I hear in the high hundreds, like 800. I hear in the thousands, like 1,600. There's some fairly large number, though, that will directly affect teachers' jobs.
And you say lost what?
Students that have left the district due to just the COVID situation, not any attrition, not any of the other things that they were talking about, declining enrollment. So I just said, can you please speak to, you've said all of these things, that if these things don't happen, there will be jobs lost in our district, but I also want to understand where we, quote unquote, stand on the fact that we've lost a lot of students that will affect jobs in the next year if and when they don't come back. And my comment didn't get addressed, but it's a big deal because the decisions they are making, I'm saying it feels to me a large part of us not swiftly moving back into hybrid right now feels like, because there's so much to figure out between the union and the district. It's not being done in a efficient manner. So because of that, people are going to continue to leave. And because of that, I would like to hear Servia's position on if they're considering this continued loss of students and how it will affect jobs as well.
Right. It's a really complex problem.
It's really complex.
And it's difficult because okay, this is terrible. Have you listened to the podcast Nice White Parents?
Oh yeah. It's awesome.
My gosh.
It's I don't know. It's not earth-shattering. That's not the right word, but it kind of really brings up so much feelings of who we are here in Danville as compared to what the Nice White Parents are in New York City, and how we feel here in Danville entitled to what we want for our students. But there's two sides. There's all these sides to it, because also that's why we're here.
Right.
And it is, why we want to live here, because we want these things for our students. So yes. Okay.
Right.
What were you going to say?
So,
about
and for those of you who haven't listened to it,
Yeah.
it's about 6 hours, but it's a podcast that focuses on the segregation in New York public education. And classically, Caucasian, but not just Caucasian, let's be clear, the producers of this made a very, very hard point of hammering the skin color of people in New York who are predominantly white and opt out of the public education. And occasionally, over the last 50, 60 years, there have been pushes to reintegrate the public schools and have more of minorities and Caucasians on the same campus. And the woman who narrates this show talks about her own experiences with a French-Canadian gentleman who has his kids makes a big push to increase enrollment in this local public school. And this is 2016. And he does this by bringing in a dual language program. Okay, so he brings in this French immersion program. And it's a middle school that they're talking about. So it's 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And the principal is dying to get more people in. Now, they had 30-ish people signed up for this 6th grade. And this guy comes in, talks about this French immersion program, convinces these other local people that are in the community. He says, hey, look, let's not go to these private schools. Let's go to this public school. And they'll make a French immersion program, and we will participate in funding it. And the principal says okay, the community says okay, and the class swells. And then enters this enormous story about the persuasion that, quote, nice white parents have over the public education because they can fundraise, they have dollars that they can provide, and therefore have a somewhat of a say over the curriculum. And that puts people predominantly minority and not white at a disadvantage because they don't have as large of a say.
Yep.
Okay. Now, I listened to that podcast, and at the end of it, I was not a huge fan for a lot of reasons. But at the end of it, she said, look, the answer is give white parents less of a say in public education. And it seemed odd to me because it was like, wait, give white parents less of a say? Because they are members of the community. They were members of that community. The 30 kids that were going there originally and then the 100 kids that came in, they were all in that community.
Yeah.
But I wanted to really think about it more because I listened to it a couple weeks ago. So I've been noodling it.
It's been a while ago for me, but yeah.
So I interview Kumar, right?
Yeah.
Kumar, Zone 3.
Yeah.
Kumar's from India.
Yeah.
Okay. Very dark skin, incredibly intelligent.
Yeah.
And he's talking to me about this speech and debate program that he participated in bringing to this school. I think it was a school when he was in Fremont.
Okay.
But he brought this speech and debate program, and they fundraised. They got people from the community in tech because Kumar's connected to tech. It was like, we generated $10,000 for this speech and debate program. We brought it in. We had it. It was wonderful.
Yeah. Cool.
And I was dying because that's the whole point of nice white parents, that white parents have this ability to manipulate public education and boo-hoo on them.
They find what they want. They have something they want, and they find a way to...
And here Kumar had a priority. He wanted the speech and debate program, and he funded it.
Sure.
And it was like, it doesn't matter if you're white or black or brown or whatever. And I was like, you're just talking about people who are trying to bring funds to their to their public school, and instead of going private, they want certain things out of that public school.
Sure, to improve the educational experience. Wasn't there something in there, though, that I feel like they did profile more than one school, so I might be combining one of them. Or
you can't remember all 7 hours perfectly?
I don't. But wasn't there...
Right.
I can't remember if that was one of them where the governing body, which at that point I think was maybe the PTA, didn't feel like they were properly informed or a part of the decision-making process. It was sort of like the white dad presented it to the principal. The principal was like, oh my gosh, this is a great avenue for getting more students in my school, and said, go for it. But the PTA was over here kind of going, but wait a second, like, what's happening? And my kids are saying, I sort of don't like this. Like, doesn't feel like my school anymore.
Sure.
And so that was
a huge problem.
Was that
yes.
one?
No, you're 100% right. So I thought about that for a long time because, again, I'm Mexican, and I went to a predominantly Mexican school growing up. And am I supposed to say Hispanic? Can I not say Mexican? I don't know. It doesn't matter. But the point is, I'm going to do me. I'm going to do me.
Totally.
So the point is,
I have no offense.
I thought about that a lot. And here's the thing. So the principal and the French Canadian gentleman who made this big movement to bring more enrollment to the school.
It's a big decision.
It's a big decision.
Yeah.
He and the principal talked about it, and she said, look, if you can fundraise for this program, I'll make sure this program happens.
Right.
And he said, done. So he did it.
Yeah.
The existing PTA said, hey, what is this French Canadian program?
Yeah.
Because this guy just generated something like $20,000 or $30,000.
Right, a lot of money.
Why don't we get some of that money? Because
That's
the
what it
lacrosse
was.
player,
Yes.
this coach needs new uniforms.
Yes.
Now,
there were other needs.
Yeah. Here's the thing. I thought about that for a long time because I realized, okay, look, it is fair for the PTA to say, hey, if we are generating revenue in the name of this school, why isn't it being distributed evenly across the school?
Right.
And they speak specifically about donor trust in that, which is, hey, look,
Yes.
if this guy goes to a donor and says, look, you're French, I'm French Canadian, I want a French dual immersion program at this public school that will be available to every single student, not just the, quote, white students.
Right.
The Puerto Rican students, black students, Hispanic students, they can all take this French immersion program. Then the donor says, here's your $10,000 check. if the gentleman who got that donation then goes and spends that on lacrosse uniforms, that is a betrayal of the donor.
Absolutely.
And the other thing is, the PTA was spending money for the public school in ways that they value.
Right.
Now, they may not
Right.
value French immersion,
Yeah.
but this gentleman
Yeah.
valued French immersion. He never asked for a penny of the money that they were fundraising.
Yeah.
He's like, look, you raised $5,000 for the football uniforms. I'm not asking for the football budget.
Totally. Yeah.
So it was a question of whose values are more important.
Yeah.
If you have this French guy who values French and he generates money for French,
Yeah.
are the things he values less important than this Hispanic woman who
Yeah.
generates $5,000 for the whatever program she likes? Their values being people going to that school should be valued equally. So if he generates the money, he should be able to spend it.
Sure.
If she generates the money, and again,
And
he
I
wasn't.
think it came down to a communication problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like if the principal had communicated effectively had that like, ooh, let's just bring all of our leadership groups together. If it's only PTA, then that's
Sure.
all it is. But I mean, I've been through this in my own elementary school before I was working there, when I was a part of a leadership group. But we need to have everybody together
Yes.
to make it feel like a collective decision,
Sure.
whether it is or not, so that there's not this pushback. Because I think that at the end of the day, in that scenario, the principal did say, I may have not gone around about this the right way.
Right.
And that might be the reason why it's such an issue.
Right.
Because I didn't get any kind of buy-in from the PTA. There was no explanation, and suddenly the nice white guy is doing these fundraisers that are kind of out of reach for our
Community.
Community.
Right. He did one at like the French consulate or something.
Yeah, that got really awkward and just scratchy. And so again, like kind of going back to the whole communication point of it, like it could have been handled differently.
Sure.
And it might not have been so for the PTA, the people that had been there, so rough for them to handle, to have this force come in and really change their whole school. Because really, it did.
It did,
You
yeah.
can't just bring in.
You can't just
you can't
make
just
a French
change your-
immersion program. And
No, and
force
you can't
people
just change your
into it.
demographic of your school like that too without a lot of groundwork. Because you need to work with your students to get them to commingle and not stay their separate groups and understand each other and all that kind of stuff too. You
Yeah,
can't just
it
throw
always
people together.
came at the end of that. It always came down to who is public education serving?
Mm-hmm.
Because there was this large message in that program that said, "Hey, look, public education isn't serving minorities when white people have a say." That was the whole point. We screwed up the public schools by giving nice white parents a say. And she actually said that in the program. It's like,
Yeah.
are you bananas?
Yeah, that's a
Then
really-
the
that's-
Caucasian parents, and they weren't. It was just parents with money.
Yeah.
They just happened to primarily be
Be
Caucasian.
Caucasian,
It's
yeah.
not all of them were Caucasian,
Right.
but the parents with money were also members of that community.
Sure.
So shouldn't the public education cater to them,
them as well.
serve them? But
Yeah.
it was the understanding in the show was, hey, these poor minorities
Mm-hmm.
are here, and the nice white parents come with their grand efforts, and they even went
Great intentions.
they went so far as to say that in the nice white parents' household, it was more likely that one person was working and one person was a homemaker, so they had more resources as far as time
Sure.
to go out and make these connections. They were more connected in the business world and the international world, and so they were able to generate these funds. It's like, well, who is public education here to serve?
Yeah.
It's theoretically to serve the whole community, not just the underrepresented.
Yeah.
You have to serve the
Everyone.
represented
Yeah.
as well,
Yeah.
right? It was
Yeah.
it was a crazy thing there. But I find us coming back to that too with our education right now, with the
Yeah.
whole school district. Who is the school district here to serve? What like you were saying, we lost 1,600 kids.
Yeah.
What if we lose another 1,600?
Right.
Are the decisions of the teachers union really serving the teachers if we lose 3,000 to 4,000 students
Right.
just from COVID.
Right.
Are
And
they serving them well?
I just don't want to place all of it on the union.
No,
I think
no,
that,
no.
It was a question that I had that I wanted it to be considered, but I don't want to place it all on one group.
Sure.
That's trying to work for the same result, I think.
If I sounded like I'm placing it there,
Yeah.
no. But
Yeah.
what I am saying is, look, they took a hard stand.
Yeah.
They took a stand. Vaccine, 0 cases.
Right.
And
Right.
we're doing it in the best interest of the district.
Right.
Because the district is the teachers, and
Yes.
without the teachers, you don't have a school. I agree with that.
Right.
But the best interest of the teachers has to necessarily be the best interest of everyone as well.
Yeah. And it
Because-
has to serve the kids. Like, at the end of the day, you have to keep the kids at the forefront of your decision-making process.
Right. Speaking of kids, you are a reading specialist, right? I didn't fall in love with reading until I was well into my 20s.
Yeah.
And my sister read Witches and Charlotte's Web and all of these books.
Yeah.
And I just had I had slight dyslexia when I was a kid. I really didn't like reading.
Yep.
How do you engage younger people and get them interested in that kind of life experience? Because it is a life experience.
It sure is, and I don't have the magic answer.
How dare you?
I don't. I know. It's terrible, isn't it? From my own personal experience with my children, I'm not like a credentialed reading specialist. I've learned on the fly, but when my children were little, I understood literacy and good literacy practices, and I guarantee you, my kids were verbal and early talkers, and we talked about letters and sounds and blah, 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 all the things. And I have 3, and so far I don't have any that will pick up a book in their spare time. I mean, we read and read and read and read and read. Like, I read to them, and we read all together all the time, and I don't have, they're not there yet. And in fact, my oldest, I have to kind of, it's painful to ask him to read and then check up on if he's reading, and try to, the book actually, that his English teacher, she wanted them to read a nonfiction kind of, it's a women in literature class, which is super funny.
Sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it's a good choice of his. I was really proud of him. And so I suggested the book Educated. And I can't think of the author's name right now, but it's a fabulous book. It's a really incredible memoir. And I was telling him all about it, really trying to get him interested and sort of engaged. And I just really don't think there's anything I can do to light that fire for him.
Do you think there's any way to shift the physical act of reading to audiobooks? Do you think there's less value in doing that? Or do you think reading is just immersion of ideas, like inputting ideas in whatever form?
I think there's value in audiobooks, especially for kids that struggle with dyslexia and have those kind of challenges. I find, even personally for myself, like, I can listen to an audiobook and I thoroughly enjoy it, but it's so easy to kind of get distracted and then you've missed a part, or, that sort of thing. So I do think that there is value in the practice and the skill of reading actual text with your eyes.
But what a greedy little position that is. Like, I'm going to sit down right here in this chair with this blanket next to the fire. Don't anybody interrupt me for 2 hours.
So awesome.
Like,
I don't understand why no one would. I don't understand my kids. Like, they're crazy.
But who's got that kind of time?
I did it this Sunday.
Oh my God.
The first time in probably 5 years, but I was near the last quarter of a book, and it was just so good. And I think I spent from 9 to noon reading.
Listen,
novel.
I would love that. Like, I am a
guilty
voracious
pleasure.
listener to things,
Yeah.
right? So I listen to an enormous amount of podcasts. I listen to,
Same.
I love them.
Yeah.
But I don't have time to sit down and just dig into a book.
Because you're physically doing things while you're listening to a podcast?
Oh yeah, I'm running. I'm driving,
you
I'm
not-
cooking breakfast. I'm
Yeah.
just like, there's
Yeah.
no point. Like, I don't watch TV during the day.
Yeah, same.
Okay. Like,
Yeah.
my day is I have the 4-year-old, 6-year-old, and 8-year-old all
Yeah.
at home.
Yeah.
And from, 6 o'clock a.m. when I wake up until I get home from work at
Yeah.
9:30, I'm moving the whole time.
Aren't they interrupting you while you're listening?
Oh, yeah. But you can hit back 15 seconds.
But this is so
Like-
annoying. Here's where I feel oddly guilty is that if I'm like totally listening to a podcast while I'm cooking dinner and somebody wants to come and talk to me or ask me a question, I don't want to be like, hold on.
Wait, let me get this right.
You wait a
You
second.
feel bad for listening to a podcast while you're cooking dinner, but you will sit
Because I
down
don't wanna
and
not
pick up
give
a
my-
book and do
Why I'm
nothing.
telling you, Matt,
will
that's
do
rare.
absolutely nothing but read this. You're not cooking dinner.
No,
you're
I
not
didn't do
folding
anything.
laundry. Like, I can do laundry,
things, I
dinner,
know.
clean the whole kitchen while I'm listening to.
Yeah.
So what my point is,
Yeah.
like, I read Moby Dick a couple years back just
Uh-huh.
because I really wanted to hit a lot of the classics that we used to make kids slog through and really dig. Speaking of, have you ever read Interview with a Vampire?
No.
Did you see the movie?
No. Maybe I did read it. But I think I might have read, it's either that one or one of the other vampire, maybe it's Vampire Diaries. I read a vampire book and I was like, this is not
The
for me.
vampire named Lestat, perhaps?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
I did read that one.
So here's the thing. Interview with a Vampire actually made me realize that there's value in the end.
I don't even remember it.
Well, the thing that the movie never really touched on was that you had these vampires that lived forever, right? And this guy goes through this epic journey to try to find the like beginning, because he becomes a vampire and he's like, where did this start? And he goes and
Yeah.
finds this 400-year-old vampire living in France. Okay, and he's
Right.
like, how old are you? He's like, I'm 400 years old. And the guy said, well, where's the 500-year-old guy? Where's it? Like, we don't die.
Yeah.
Like, what's the problem?
Yeah.
And it took a whole book to get across, but you understood that at the end, this guy explained, he's like, the elasticity of the human mind is not changed when you become a vampire. So you're like a rubber band. You can only stretch and contract so many times. And over the course of hundreds of years, you can't keep up with the shifting age of the world, right? And so at the end, he sees one of his vampire friends who has like lost it. And he's like cowering in this corner because an ambulance drives by. And he's like, it's just a car. But the guy had lost the capacity to shift along with the culture and the society in the world. Mm-hmm. And so at the kind of near the end of the book, this 400-year-old vampire realizes like he just can't keep up anymore, and he wanders off like into the sunrise.
Yeah.
And it made me realize like, oh, there's this point in your human experience, or there may be, when you just want to rest and you don't want to keep fighting to understand. And it was such a dark and beautiful, twisted realization. It's like, oh, I get it. They're tortured by immortality.
Yep.
They have to meet their end because they can't, and it's distinctly human.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where you're like, God. Anyway, so I'm reading these books years back.
Just catching up with the classics.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So you realize that Moby Dick is this really intense book. It's like Moby Dick, Last of the Mohicans, like all this very deep, dense language and prose. And to imagine a 16-year-old that I work with sitting down and slogging through Moby Dick, or like The Old Man in the Sea,
It's
or
really
something,
funny, actually.
like it's impossible.
Yeah.
I think it's just impossible from a time constraint.
Yeah.
Like, think of what your students go through, even the younger ones.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like, the requests we have of them and their time and their life and their attention seem so extraordinary.
Yeah. It's interesting. And I don't know. But I mean, I know plenty of kids that just really enjoy reading and will pick up a book on their own. And
How old are these kids?
high schoolers, middle schoolers.
You know high schoolers who have that kind of
I have
time?
one friend that has kids that read. How about that?
You know somebody who knows somebody.
I have one friend that I know her kids read.
Oh
or at least
my
I know
God.
2 of the 3 of them read.
Do they read just because it's what's assigned in school?
No, they pick up books on their own.
That's amazing.
It's I know. It's something to aspire to. But
Those
I don't think I'm gonna
kids,
reach
those
it.
kids are not in sports. They are not
They
in music.
are. They're super
Stop it.
well-rounded kids that have.
Where do
good
they get the time?
I think they just have downtime. I don't know when they read. I've never asked. I haven't asked.
You got to do me a solid and ask, because I'm so curious now.
I'm gonna do some digging.
Because my point in asking about the audiobooks is because I think if you gave students a different medium to digest the same ideas, because we have changed, the world has changed, right?
Well, yeah. So I know for sure, like 8th grade English, both of my high schoolers, part of the way they, quote unquote, read novels in school was listening to it. And it wasn't listening to the teacher read, it was listening to it on an audio book recording. So they have been exposed to it, but that doesn't make it any more, I don't know.
Delectable.
Yeah, desirable. Yeah, to them. And in fact, I think they just say it usually just kind of puts them to sleep, makes them sleepy.
And they feel like reading doesn't put them to sleep?
Yeah, well, it's the same. Well, that's what I'm like, if you can't sleep, then pick up a book. I promise you will fall asleep. I
like that you're a reading specialist and you did this.
I'm trying to even encourage them that way. I'm like, pick up a book. You'll probably fall asleep. But they're like, okay, yeah, that's the last thing I want to do.
You're a reading specialist. You understand the nature and value of the written word. And you see how far, like 1950, my dad, my old man, right?
Yeah.
I told him I read Moby Dick. And he was like, oh, I really liked that book. I said, oh, when did you read it? When he was 15.
Wow.
Right? Or,
yeah.
What's the other one? Not Typhoon, but Shogun. You ever read Shogun?
I've not read it, but I know it was like my mom had it. I saw it on, a coffee table growing up.
Yeah, like a suitcase. It's a giant book.
It's ginormous, yeah.
It is a beautiful novel. It is so great. I mean, it took me a month to slog through, and I was putting in hours a day.
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful book. And my dad had read it, and he said, oh, I read Shogun, I read Typhoon, and I read, like, Black Ship or something. There was a third book by the same author, same kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think the generations removed from that, we're reading less and less and less and immersing ourselves in more base, simplistic ideas that are actually degrading our capacity for nuanced thought.
Fully agree.
Okay.
Fully.
How do we fix this?
Take away devices. You have to take away devices.
Do you think that's it?
Yeah. Because they're getting all of I feel like in my own home, the time that they're looking for a diversion, that I will pick up a book to read because I also am into the story and that sort of thing. But and I've been caught up in it myself, where there's times where I'll go months between reading a book because I'm too, caught up in the diversion of the device. And I fully feel like that is a huge part of it. And I have to say that I think there are more and more very young kids that, I can't say that they have learning disabilities yet. I don't really know, but the younger kids that I'm seeing more regularly and year over year, I have no scientific evidence, of course, but I feel in my heart of hearts that a large part of their either delay, under-practiced skills, or potentially learning disability is because they do have something in their hand from the time that they're very, very young. And as soon as that thing is in their hand, and I don't care what it is, I don't care if it's even like an educational game, it still does not replace the interaction, the human interaction and the give and take of what passes back and forth with language when there are two humans talking to each other. And I think it's giving me great job security, but it's also creating some things that I don't know, I'm not qualified right now to fix unless I work with kids one-on-one, because there are really big gaps in literacy knowledge or skills.
Right. And the literacy. So the reason I fell in love with writing is because I entered this rhetoric department at Cal, and all of a sudden I learned how to write very effectively, which meant I had to be thinking very deeply, right? Because I had to slow it. It's like 1,000 words a minute in my head. I think that's how fast you think, or roughly around there.
Okay.
And you can type or you can speak something like 300 words a minute. Okay, but you can only type if you're reasonably proficient, 60 or 70 words a minute.
Okay.
So all of a sudden you had to slow down your
Yeah.
entire methodology and start this painstaking process of writing things out. And that forced you to hyperthink about what you were actually writing, because you couldn't just blow past it in your head,
Yeah.
nor could you persuade somebody and just blow past little things with your spoken word. You had to grind to a halt.
Yeah.
And that made me dive into the language, right? It made me dive into the written word, because I realized, like, oh, snap. There are these really intricate ideas that are trapped in these, 500-page books.
Yeah.
It's going to take weeks to dig this stuff out. But
Yeah.
once you get to the end of it, you have this nuance and you have this understanding that you don't have otherwise.
Yeah. And it's forced you to think about things
Right.
maybe that you haven't thought about before, or thought about or thinking about in different ways.
Right.
Yeah.
I keep trying to do that that's what the weekday podcasts are about. They're just
yeah.
the little ones I do, the little 10
yeah.
minutes. And it's literally like intellectual chewing gum. Right.
That's
So
a good way of putting it.
it's literally, I thought about it and said, okay, what could I do for my students, either coming to school or going from school, that would get their brains thinking like, I wonder about that.
Yeah.
And then get them thinking about things and being a little bit more introspective or thoughtful as they arrive at school or they leave school.
Yeah.
And they're only 10 minutes, so
Right.
they're super easy to digest.
Totally.
But what if we got students ingesting books and convince them, look, you don't have to set aside 45 minutes. Like,
Yeah.
listen to this on your way to school.
Right.
Listen to it leaving school. Listen to it when you're running.
Right.
Because that would increase, that's what I'm saying. Like, we're shifting, you're saying technology. We'll never get the phone out of their hands.
Right. No, we won't.
So how can we make reading or conveying ideas effective?
Yeah. Ideas, and also learning too, because that's the other part of reading, is it's not just for conveying ideas, it's for learning factual information, nonfiction books. And I think, maybe part of what we need to do in schools is start, I don't know if maybe that's what, when my kids were in middle school, that's what the teachers were trying to teach too, was we're going to listen to this novel and then kind of work with the same sort of comprehension ideas. But I wonder if there was any instruction on how you're going to listen to it and what your expectation, I mean, surely there was expectations on the end of after that, but I don't know. I don't know. I wish I knew overall if there was teaching to how you're going to listen and kind of build the ideas or hold them in your head, because I think that here's another problem that I see with young kids, but that working memory is underdeveloped. So that is when you take in and you hold it until you have to use it, and then it sort of goes out, but there's still some sort of imprinting in your brain, and that's how we are eventually reading, is because the whole word sort of goes in and stays there, because you start seeing words as whole pieces instead of individual sounds that are put together. And so with young kids, so something I did in school every week was dictation, spelling dictation, right? And the teacher would read the sentence. You'd have to kind of hold it in your head as you're writing it on the piece of paper. Well, it's part of the practice that I do with my kids. So because I need to massage and build that working memory, because it's not very developed.
Right.
And again, no research on my own, but I can only point, it's a very logical thing to point to, is that because everything on your phone is so kind of quick twitch,
Right.
you can spin from, or, swipe from one thing to another without really engaging in much, and nothing is staying, if you will, or you're not even like holding on to things for a while until you need it, and that sort of thing. So I don't know. There has to be teaching. If we're going to start using audiobooks and that kind of digital ingestion for it, then we have to figure out how to teach kids how to utilize it so it doesn't just become a waste, another thing that's sort of
another tack, another shift, another pivot.
Utilized, but not taught why or how.
That's an incredible insight. When I was learning how to write more effectively, one of my Michael Mashu, who was at the time the head of the rhetoric department. I took this course from him, and he just roasted us to hell. It was advanced argumentative writing, and he was tremendous. He had written books, an incredible writer, incredible persuader, and he always said, he was like, look, some of you are writing these sentences that are complex, they're nice, they're great, but they start out with this incredible, lengthy description. And I was like, what do you mean? He was like, so you start a sentence with, hanging on the wall because everyone thought it was a good idea and wanted to put the poster there. Matt really liked the Star Wars poster. Or something like that, right?
Yeah.
He was like, look, you're having the reader hold all of this information description in their head. It's like green car. You have to hold the word green in your head before you see that it's talking about the car. And you find younger students with these elaborate descriptions that are 20, 30, 40 words long. But literally, it's almost like the reader's holding their breath until they get to the actual point of the sentence.
The meat of it,
That's right. And his recommendation, his insistence was, hey, look, if you have more than 7 words before you get to the verb, cut your sentence.
You've lost your people.
Right. He was like, you don't, and I'm not talking about until you get to the noun. I mean, like, get to the verb. And then we're moving. And it's like what you're saying. You have to have this working memory in your head where you capture all of these things and then apply them to a specific target.
Yeah. I talk to kids a lot also about, because they have so much graphic input nowadays with their phones and stuff, everything is graphically oriented. Instagram, everything they do. They're watching videos nonstop, that sort of thing. They also aren't bored. They're not sitting with just trying to, entertain themselves in their own head. So they oftentimes lack the ability, or they look at me with kind of like, what is she talking about in her head? When we read a passage and I said, okay, tell me about the movie that you have going on in your head right now based on that passage. And they'll kind of be like, what? And I'm like, well, when you're reading, you should be visualizing, what's happening and what's going on. And it's another skill that allows that input to go somewhere and connect to their life experiences or the things that they don't know or what they might wonder from it and that sort of thing, which again would apply directly to listening. The same thing happens when you're listening, right? Because you have to be kind of building some sort of image in your head of what you're listening to, whether you're listening or reading.
Right.
You have to be doing that, and it is maybe that might be part of the reason why, my kids aren't super into it, because that I didn't work on that skill with them,
How could you?
How dare I?
Well,
I failed them.
Now that you've described it in these terms, it's almost like you have a working cache in your head, right? That you can take in and then dump out. But that would, in my mind, really explain why younger people aren't necessarily into reading if they have an underdeveloped capacity to carry these ideas. Because I worked with a student years ago, and he had to read his English teacher. I think he went to Akalani's or something.
Okay.
His English teacher made him read Siddhartha, and I was like, "Oh,
I've never heard of it."
It's a Hess. It's a good book.
Okay.
It's very short, but it gives a very, very incredible perspective on the plight of human existence, and it's very cool. And you get to the end of it, and this guy is describing the river, right, that he happens to be sitting next to. It's in India, and he's like, look, where does the river start? And they keep trying to point to it. It's like, well, is it here? Is it in the mountains? Well, where does the water come from the mountains? Well, it comes from the rain and snow. Okay, where does the rain and snow come from?
Yeah.
Well, lower down in the river, and it evaporates and drops over here. So it's like, there is no start and stop to it. It's just this never-ending cycle, like the river is the whole circle. And the point was, that's kind of like human existence, right? Like, where does it stop? We learn, the novel starts out with this guy turning his back on his dad because he was raised very wealthy and wanted to go out and like be awesome and find himself. And then the novel ends with him being by this river with this guy who helps ferry people back and forth, and his estranged son ditches him. And the guy's like, well, would you have listened to your son, or would you have listened to yourself when you were younger?
Yeah.
And it was just this beautiful reflection on the difficulties of conceptualizing the whole as a younger person. And it's almost like, I don't mean how this is going to sound. Okay. I was thinking about describing marriage to my students today.
Okay.
And you likely know at this point, I have an elaborate tool of ridiculous jokes that it's like I dump nonstop on my students.
Keep them engaged.
Today was particularly crazy, and we were just laughing the whole time and writing and working. But the thing that I was thinking that I didn't actually convey to them is, look, I have to make the prospect of marriage so painful for them that they will only marry the person that they feel overcomes like the friction coefficient.
All of that pain.
All of the pain. Because they're like, look, Matt made it sound so horrible, so terrible, but being not married to this person seems worse.
Yes. Okay.
Right? So you have to make it to the point where young people feel that marriage is a terrible idea.
Yes.
And the only reason they're getting married is because being without this person causes them worse pain.
Okay.
And that, I was thinking, it was like,
are you sure that's what they're taking away from it?
No, they shouldn't be. They shouldn't be. And that's the point.
Okay.
They should take away that marriage is terrible. And then only when they find the person, they're like, well, I've always believed marriage is terrible.
But actually, now I have this person.
I have this person.
Yeah.
Like, I still believe this will be terrible. But being without this person that I've chosen, that will be worse.
Yeah.
They don't. I hope none of them listen to this, because that's what I was thinking. And we were like, I was like making all these jokes. And I was like, well, good. I hope they believe me. I hope they believe me, because then maybe we'll have more long-lasting marriages.
Solid
because people will make the decision, because like the pain of being without this person, my person, is too great.
Yeah.
You know, so I was thinking, is it that marriage is one of the things like the river? Like, it takes a lifetime to understand where it starts, where it stops, the turbulence, like where you are in the river. Mm-hmm. Are you at the point where you're, rainfall? Are you at the point where you're the waterfall? Yeah. Are you the point where you're placidly drifting down? We only know in retrospect.
Right. Totally.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
So anyway, this guy had to read Siddhartha.
Yeah, poor kid. Good Lord.
But I saw this as one of those beautiful things where I'm like, oh my God, of course he had no idea what he was reading, because he's reiterating his working memory was so limited. I was like, what's Siddhartha? And this was before I read it.
Yeah.
And he said, I don't know, he like died and he came back to life, and then like some other stuff happened, and then he was eating bananas. And I'm thinking,
he's so disengaged, like he can't even like connect any of the events that are happening.
Right. Because the people who make the reading lists, like, I think Siddhartha is beautiful, but it says things like quoth Siddhartha, and like he was asking, and it was like, well, of course any 16-year-old is gonna miss that.
Yeah.
So here's a different question for you.
Okay.
How do we meet the students where they are?
Well, I think it's interesting because there is, like, our district has been using a reading, it's not like a program, but a reading approach for a long, long time. It started when I had my kids and left and stayed home for a while, and it's still going on, but there's a little shift happening. And that approach was essentially get books in the hands of kids that are right above their quote-unquote level of reading, but is of their interest, is something that they are interested about. So
something that challenges them
just enough to make them grow as readers, but is kind of almost their choice of topic. And the unfortunate side of that is that it completely, well, in my opinion, it left off all of the structured kind of phonics instruction that you need in order to access the text. And so my kids were okay because I was a teacher and I made sure that they had that sort of stuff. But my opinion so far is what I'm seeing is that this approach, I'm not sold that it is building, because the whole goal is to build lifelong readers that love to read.
Right.
And I don't have it in my house. And my kids had the benefit of, a solid literacy,
right.
From toddler babies, whatever. So I don't know. I don't feel like this is the exact thing. I wonder if maybe it's because some kids are working so hard to still just access the text that they can't even get to the point where they really enjoy it and love it. I wonder if there's too many other distractions, that there's always so many choices of other things to do. Why would they read?
Right.
Yeah, from the very beginning, I don't have I don't have a magic answer. I'm not exactly sure what we can do aside from taking away technology, which is not a feasible answer.
The Amish have people that don't like to read.
Is that right?
Yeah, so here's
How
something...
do you know this?
So here's something very interesting. They have children that are like our children.
Mm-hmm.
Some are very introspective, some are introverts, some love reading, books, and some love,
working with their hands. Yeah.
And some love hunting.
Yeah.
And some love running around and throwing heavy things.
Yeah.
And they have no technology. So the idea, overall idea that it's like, oh, this cell phone.
I can't keep blaming technology.
Well, I don't think it's you. I think it's everyone.
Yeah.
I think everyone looks at their cell phones and says, hey, this cell phone has ruined everything.
Yeah.
And I don't think that we're allowing for the diversity of human beings.
Sure. I think that's fair.
Look, I love reading, okay? I haven't read a physical book in, I don't know, it has to be like 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Right? I've read on my phone.
Yeah.
Okay, because
not paper.
Not paper,
Okay.
because I don't have time.
Uh-huh.
But like when I'm standing at Pete's for a coffee, I will read for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And I will ingest in that way. I listen to podcasts voraciously because sometimes I have this really weird thing with ingesting ideas. I almost think it's arrogant to go after a certain experience, like a business book. Okay, I'll explain.
Uh-huh.
Here we go. Say I pick up a book on business. I can anticipate learning something about business. Okay? That's fair, right? That's not silly or crazy or anything. Like, that's
simple.
totally fair.
Yeah.
But if I listen to, say, a podcast with a comedian and an author, okay, I might glean things from that I would have never, ever anticipated. Sure. That change the way I view my state of the world. Right? Now, if I am in control of what I ingest, it's entirely possible that I would have looked past the podcast with the comedian and the author.
Right.
Because I didn't know what was in it. And I sided with, well, this is a known factor. I'm going to learn something about business. But very recently, I listened to a podcast, it was actually just a couple months ago, where I'm like, oh my God, that's the most important thing I've ever heard about negotiating. Yeah. And now, mind you, I don't negotiate a lot. Like,
it's not a part of your business,
It's not a part of my thing.
Yeah.
But I know now, I'm like, that is such an insight into behaviors of people.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's what I mean, where it's kind of like, do I know what's best for me to ingest?
Yeah.
Always.
No.
And I think there's
not
a degree
even.
of, no, there's not, Matt. Like, you don't know what you're going to get out of that.
Right.
So don't write it off. Anyway, so, God, I totally lost it. I was going somewhere.
I think maybe about like books in hands of kids where they have the choice.
Oh, right.
And blaming technology.
Yes, blaming technology. Yes, right. Exactly. My apologies. So the Amish just meet people where they are.
Yeah.
which is what I said originally. How do we meet people where they are? Because there are some kids in Amish communities that love to run and hunt and do stuff like that. And there are some kids in Amish communities who love to find the nuances of woodworking. And there are some kids in Amish communities who don't like any of that, and they like other things.
Yeah.
But it's in the absence of technology.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not one of those things that we really can, as a culture, just say, oh, woe is us. We can never stop this thing, and it's responsible for all of our ails.
Yeah.
No, that's not true.
No, that's not true. Right. And it's just like every other generation when a new piece of technology came and they thought it was going to be the end of civilization, right?
Right.
And I guess because in my unscientific knowledge, it's easy to push my excuses onto technology, but I appreciate what you're saying, that even despite when no technology is available, there's still just individual preferences.
There are people
that just have no desire.
Right.
It's just not a part of who they are. And I think that's where it's where education really needs to look at what options we have for kids, because kids and younger adolescents, because I think for kids, I think you have to continue to try to lay the foundation. I don't think you can just say, ooh, I don't think they're going to be a reader. Like that's
in first grade.
In first,
you're done.
Probably
Max,
like maybe
you're
through
done.
8th grade, even. Like you think you have to stay the course and give them opportunity after opportunity and supports. But at a certain point, for sure, I mean, I think that reading and writing is not for every kid, and expecting them to continue to kind of plow through the rigid expectations of you're going to take an English class every year, you're going to take a math class, the first 2 years, and then it's your choice after that. I wish there were other options for kids. And I'm not saying that they should not still have to have some sort of interwoven reading and writing aspect, but maybe just not the main focus.
Gotcha.
Through whatever it is that they're allowed to explore, because we're in a place and time where we should acknowledge that the mainstream expectations are not for every kid.
How do we address the fact that fewer young men are wanting to go to college?
I didn't even know that was a thing. That's a thing.
So 60% of higher education is female, 40% is male. And is it just that more women now have access? Well, regardless, 60% are female.
Yeah.
40% are male. And look, I know you're not
that.
It's a really
Yeah.
How interesting is it that you didn't know that?
Yeah.
Because if it were the other way around, you likely would.
It's true. It's very true.
And the reason I bring this up is because I feel like there is a lot of elementary education and elementary influence that goes into dissuading younger boys from falling in love with education. And again, that's anecdotal, but I will tell you why I think this.
Yeah.
So I have a very, very active set of boys.
Yeah.
Okay. If you hadn't noticed, I have a bit of energy.
Yes.
And you can imagine me as like a 6-year-old just
Yeah. All over the place.
Right. So my boys are incredibly active. And my oldest, when he was going through elementary school in town, kindergarten and first grade, it was clear that his kindergarten teacher described him as a bull in a china shop.
Okay.
Now, this is not a rude boy. He's super sweet, super responsive, super affectionate, just hyper energy.
Yeah.
And he immediately they kept trying to label him as like, something. They were like, he's a this or he's a that or it was like, whoa. Why do you think that?
Yeah.
And when it kept coming back to it, it was, so he has a lot of energy. Mm-hmm. Right. And they put things like these bands on the bottom of his seat so he could sit there and he just move his feet and like wiggling in his seat. And he just has an extreme amount of energy.
Yeah.
And the holy grail of elementary education, appears to be more, I mean, statistically, it's more of the very calm, attentive young girl, right? That it has more control over herself, has a longer attention span, and is capable of doing what our system is requiring, which is sit there quietly and listen to me.
Yeah.
Right? And pushed far enough, if you extrapolate that out, like, okay, let's take the formative years, right? K through 5.
Yeah.
And let's say you have an active kid, like I was, by the way. I was not engaged. My sister was.
Yeah.
And, we could make our own arguments about intelligence and stuff, but I would at the very least argue we're similar.
Yeah.
But I had a ton of energy. And I had to slog through this pickup of having missed my elementary education because I got derailed because she went to the GATE program and then she was on a different schedule than I was, so she got more time to sleep in because statistics.
Or no?
No, we're not. We're only 15 months apart though.
Okay,
so we were very
apart.
close.
Okay.
I'm Mexican, It's like my kids, parents, God, made it happen. Anyway, the point is that my point is we had. My family had kids very close together, and I was the last one, and I had an extreme amount of energy, and because of that, people just kind of pushed it to the side, whereas my sister could sit there and listen.
Sure.
And so coming into high school, she had a massive head start, and then it took me all the way through college to really catch up to her. And seeing now the way that the public schools that I encountered dealt with young boys with high energy, I can see how you have this very significant divergence from a very young age.
Yeah.
And things like reading. Okay. Classically, young boys are less interested in stories and elaborate interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
And young girls are more interested in it. Right?
Yeah.
So reading is one of those hallmarks of, is this person learning?
Yeah.
Whereas the young boy just may not be inclined to be interested in these things yet.
Yeah.
So I ask because you are a reading specialist, and is there a way to engage people with reading at a younger age that makes them more interested, right? Like first graders can't read Three Musketeers, and it's very hard to make a curious or exciting or engaging story. But is there a way to do that so we don't have this kind of like dual education? It's like one education for the kids who are 6 and can sit quietly, and then a separate but theoretically parallel education for the kids who have a lot of energy and wiggle in their seats.
I mean, is it as simple as allowing them to stand while they're trying to read, like that sort of thing? Or is that, I mean, like reflecting on your growing up or even your own children.
Sure.
Like if they're allowed some freedoms, if you will, of what they're doing physically, but still being asked to attend to a task.
Sure.
I mean, what's working for your kids now?
You know what's so crazy? My 6-year-old is on the 6th Harry Potter book. Or excuse me, 8-year-old. He's in 3rd grade. He's crushing these books that I didn't read till college, to be honest. Like, I'm going to out myself here. Yeah. But I found Harry Potter and was like, wow, that's great.
Yeah.
But he was not into it at a younger age.
So what's he do while he's reading that? I mean, 8 years old is very young to be reading Harry Potter.
Right.
So
we were actually really worried about the content. People are dying in this book.
I don't mean that. I mean,
I got you.
It's English.
The effort.
It's a very, very complex text to be reading for an 8-year-old. But what's he physically doing while he's reading it? For an active boy, what is he doing?
We have to run that kid like a greyhound. We have to exhaust him. And when I mean exhaust, like, I am tired.
Yeah.
Like I could run a marathon right now.
No
but you gotta exhaust him and take away every other avenue to like keep wrestling. Because it's like 7:00, he's done with his bath, the other boys are asleep, and we're like, Marcus, go read your book.
Yeah.
And so he does.
Yeah.
But you have to take away every other avenue of, no, we're not going to wrestle around. No, I'm not going to play tag with you.
None of these things are an option.
None of these things are an option. And he will go read. And I actually talked to him about the text. He's taking it all in.
Yeah.
And he'll come out and start pronouncing like little spells
yeah,
from the
yeah,
book of like,
yeah.
oh my God,
Yeah.
you're on page 500, aren't you?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
and you're reading it.
Right.
You remember these words that are
Yeah.
like made up fictitious Latin roots
Sure.
and stuff.
Yep. Yeah.
So yeah, no, you just have to exhaust him first. When we were at Green Valley, we would run from the parking lot all the way to school. It was a Green Valley Pool, and
Yep.
we'd have to cross the street, and so we'd cross
Yep.
the street. But then we'd sprint. It was like a 2-minute sprint all the way up to the front area.
Yep.
And when you did that, he was like breathing and he was huffing and puffing, and people would be like, "Oh, you guys are running again." It's like,
Yes,
we're
we
running for a
are.
reason.
Yes.
We're running because they just
Yeah.
they have that engine.
Yeah. I feel like that is not always the norm for boys. You know, I mean, I think there are, I mean, you could characterize, but I think that's sort of an extreme on the energy spectrum for boys. Because in general, I feel like, you know, most don't need to be run, for lack of a better word,
Sure.
like that in order to have some ability to sit and maintain attention, if that makes sense.
100%.
So I'm not sure it's realistic to try to problem solve for the masses with that lens.
Oh,
if
sure.
that makes sense.
Look, I'm not saying he's the norm. Like, I'm completely happy saying I'm a little cuckoo.
But what do you do so that he can, you know, sit through a 6-hour school day? Like, if
So-
you're regularly in school.
Sure. While he's in remote learning, he'll bust out of his room.
Yeah.
Right? Because I
'Cause
made
he
this little
can.
desk.
Yeah.
And he'll come out of his room on his break. He comes out screaming.
Yeah.
"Ah!" And
Right.
it's like, you just
Yeah.
know the energy train showed
Yeah.
up. So
Yeah.
he comes out. I have this little, I've talked about it a lot, a little stock tank pool in my backyard.
Uh-huh.
So it's an 8-foot round steel tank that's 2 feet high. So literally we have a 15-minute break. He comes out ripping his shirt off,
Yeah.
right? Like bombing into the backyard. He's
Yeah.
naked by the time he hits the patio
Yeah.
with his suit in his hand. He jumps in, swims around. We have like these little stations in our house where
Yeah.
it's like insanity can ensue at the drop of a hat.
Especially with 3 boys. Yeah.
3 boys, and it's literally like a fire hose
And
of
I'm sure
kinetic
you help.
energy.
Like,
well, you know,
yeah.
it's me. I mean,
Yeah.
but
Yes.
you have to allow him these dumps.
Yeah,
It's
breaks.
literally like
Yeah.
just this dump of energy, and then he can go back in
Yeah.
and keep doing it. And he does. He's really successful. I mean, he's not like a genius or anything, but he's really successful in managing these times. I've been very, very proud of him.
That's great. I mean,
Yeah.
but so when he's in the classroom, when he's in the walls of a classroom, how does he manage that? Because that seems harder.
Now remember, he has recess, right? So he has proper
Sure.
go out to the playground and run
Moments
around.
of,
Yes.
Is it enough? Or is it continue to be a problem?
I don't think it's a problem. Well, you have to remember, we switched him to
Or
St.
challenge?
Isidore.
Not a problem.
So we moved him to a private school.
Yeah.
Whose principal at the time when we moved him had boys, and it was reputed she very much understood young boys and education and energy and differences.
Yeah.
And I appreciated that
Yeah.
because all of his teachers are like, look, Marcus is great, kind-hearted, wonderful boy,
Yeah.
high energy,
High energy.
easily distracted.
Yeah.
And they worked with him, and we reinforced at home. So when he got, again, we did K in first grade at
Right.
Green Valley, and then pulled the ripcord
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Went to St. Isidore, much better experience. And they ran him like crazy, and very good communication with the teachers back and forth. So we were all on the same page.
Yep,
There were,
perfect.
like
Yeah.
teacher, aide, and then me and my wife.
Yep.
And so there were 4 of us tag teaming this.
Yep.
So yeah, so
then
he
that's
manages.
worked.
Yes,
Yeah.
that has worked.
Yeah. Good.
That has worked.
That's
but
good.
Again, I don't expect you to solve the problems of,
No, I
of
know, but like
education.
even just ideas, right? Like, I mean, the ideas off the top of my head would be similar to what he was given in terms of the band on the chair, or, you know, in our school, there's all kinds of seat choice. There's those stools that kind of rock and all that kind of stuff, but it's still kind of involving sitting, where
Sure.
I have had in the past, like a little guy that just I don't know, he's up and down and all around, like falling off his chair and all that kind of stuff. And mind you, I have him for 30 minutes. Like, that's it. It's not a long time.
I love the falling off the chair. It's
God,
like, will you just sit down?
Like, if you just keep your butt in the chair, like, it's all good. It's so funny. But in as much as I am a little bit old-fashioned in that I don't think that some semblance of conformity is bad.
Oh, yes, 100%.
I do understand that kid that just does not have the faculties to maintain. And so if I see it, I'm like, please stand up. Like, let's get rid of that chair. Because if getting rid of that chair allows you to, focus a little bit more on what's here and me and what I'm saying and that sort of thing, I'm willing to do that. And mind you, I have 5 kids at a time, not a class of 30
Sure.
kids. So it gets exponentially complicated when you have a whole class of students and stuff like that. And when that energy just kind of like bounces, because it's infectious too, right? It's not just one kid that's sort of,
oh yeah,
like a bouncy ball. It hits everything, and then suddenly, they're all kind of going. So
yeah.
It's I don't know. I think it needs to be acknowledged. I think that communication, like what you're getting now, is probably the best route, and it's allowing your son to be who he is and not fully stifling with conformity, and hopefully providing the best environment for him to be able to learn.
Right.
Yeah.
How do you raise a student athlete?
Oh my gosh, I don't know, Matt, because I didn't know that that's what I was doing. When I got into this whole mothering gig, it was not like, my husband's super into water polo, he coaches club team, all that kind of stuff, and it is not something that I had in my mind as what I was doing. My son, my kids, it's not just one, it's actually all of them, are the ones that are finding the passion, realizing the opportunity, and capitalizing on it.
What do you mean?
Well, because my husband is so, what's the right word? Passionate about the sport. My kids play, and maybe
but that
not
doesn't
because
mean they're passionate.
I know. Well, hold on, I'm getting there.
Okay, sorry.
It doesn't mean that they're playing necessarily because they absolutely want to from the beginning. But what has happened, at least my older two, my youngest is still, she's still in that, likes to do everything, and
Sure.
we're kind of like, oof, the sports and the activities we have to start kind of eliminating, because there's just not, or at least I would love to go back to needing to eliminate something, but we're not there now. But we've allowed them to try everything and given them an opportunity to, we've exposed them to all the choices, essentially. And maybe because my husband's passion is water polo, that is what has been more talked about and more focused on in our house. But my oldest has been provided opportunities to train and continue to improve on his abilities and his skills. And I think that because of those opportunities, it solidified a passion for him. And that's how he became a student athlete. And my next one, she's on a similar path. She's definitely more academically motivated than Wyatt has ever been. So she, I think, I don't know. I'm still not sure, because she's more, I frequently talk to her about options, and that this is not your only option, and you can do whatever you want, and you can say I'm done whenever you feel like it. But I also know that she's watching what her brother's doing, or is the opportunities that have opened up for him, and I know she knows that it's an avenue that she can pursue if she wants to continue.
Something you said here, that you tell your daughter she can be done whenever she wants to. This is such a nuanced and difficult line to draw, I feel like, with young people, because
Sure.
especially in athletics, there has to come a point where the athlete realizes that they're only there because they want to be there.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
But especially in the early goings, and sometimes through the hardest moments, you have to force them to keep going.
Yeah.
And in the absence of agency, they just despise you.
Yeah.
Right?
It's just you anyways.
Terrible. But
Yeah.
in the absence of forcing them,
Mm-hmm.
they may make what I think outsiders would determine would be a bad call. Like you have a very
tragic choice. Yeah.
you have a very talented, very capable
Yeah.
person who's passionate, has a bad day.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, forget this.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
out. How do you strike that balance?
I mean, it's never that. It's never like just a bad day. I think it's just I never present it as one-sided. It's always, you have choices and you have a lot of talents and a lot of skills, I guess. I don't know, academic skills. I'm not sure that's what it is, but successes with academics as well. So I present it to her as, right now it looks like this is not bringing you kind of any joy or it's not making you want to work harder. It's not making you want to.
It's not inspiring your life.
It's not inspiring you to continue to want to get better and do more and that sort of thing. So I'm here to help you evaluate, of course. I would never just allow you to make a decision like this because you're a kid, essentially, and as a child or as an adolescent, you don't necessarily see all of the pieces to that decision. So when I say you can stop if you want, it's never just that sentence. It's filled with all of the stuff on both sides of that, so that she understands that there's consequences to your choices. And, this could be a consequence, but it also could be, and it's not necessarily a negative consequence. There's lots of things that could unfold, but ultimately I'm also not going to make that choice for you unless I see that it's obviously a detrimental
damaging, sure.
thing for you. So that's kind of where it's been for a little while, for so many reasons, not just being adolescent, but just a whole confluence of things that I kind of, when she comes home after practice, and I'm sort of like, ugh, it's not feeling super positive, and life is too short, even when you're only 15, to continue to muddle through this if you don't see that there's going to be a change for yourself. And if there's no potential for change, for making it any better, I don't like to see you go through being miserable.
Sure.
For something that, I don't know, it's a sport, it's a choice.
Right.
It's not something you have to do. You have to do school. Like, that's not a choice. But the extracurriculars are a choice.
Well, how is it that you've created that? So, if I may out you a little bit,
Okay.
Your son, that I'm very much a fan of,
He's a pretty good kid.
he's a good kid.
Yeah, I like him too.
He cheated once on his homework, but it's fine. The point is, I caught him. That's the beauty
good.
of it.
And he probably owned up to it too. Hopefully.
He was like, I missed 8. I'm like, no, you didn't.
You
He's
didn't.
like, all right, you got me.
Yeah.
He didn't fight it too hard. He wanted to be caught. That was the thing.
Yeah.
So he is a good student, but also an incredible athlete that's going to go to one of the best programs in the country. And he will academically be viable at this school. So to get both of those things seems like it's something that people blow off, I feel like. It's like, look, do you understand how difficult it is to get somebody to this level of competence in athletics and this level of will because that's what it is. And you don't find a lot of willful, 17-year-olds that are willing to just do the nitty gritty. Like
I guess it is a smaller percentage of the population.
People don't recognize that that's what they're dealing with.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that's striking to me, because I think parents see their children as willful when it comes to arguments. Mm-hmm. It's like, I want to go out. No, you can't go out. And they'll argue back and forth. Yeah. But I think the idea of them being willful individuals against adversity, it's almost like people have seen their kids in sports from a very young age. Like, you're on the swim team when you're 5 and you're terrible and you're just flopping up and down the pool. Right. And then you're like 10 and you do something kind of cool, but it's still whatever. Yeah. And some sports, like, for instance, water polo or rowing, you can't even do until you're in 8th grade. Right. Right. Uh-huh. So you're kind of like building this base of athleticism until you're in 8th or 9th grade, and then you start doing those sports. And by the time you're a senior and going on to play a particular sport at potentially one of the best academic institutions in the country, it's like, to have somebody who can do both of those things simultaneously, it's almost like people don't recognize what's walking in front of them. Yeah. And people very much write athletes off as like, oh, he's just this or he's just that. It's like, well, if he was just that, I don't think he would be able to survive at this school. Right. And that's why I'm curious about it, because there are plenty of people who are not athletes. Like, I went to Cal, okay? I did not row in high school, but I rowed while I was at Cal. Oh, and there were, awesome. Yeah, well, I mean, Concord doesn't really have a lot of rowing programs. But the point is, so I step onto the rowing team as a novice, having never done it. And there were, I think, Ignacio Valley did not field a very good pool of people going to Berkeley, but we had, I think, 6 of us. So 5 or 6 of us that made it there. And it was like clockwork. Like 3 or 4 of them all went on academic probation almost immediately because they were ill-equipped. I survived. I'm not saying I'm better than them. I think a large part of it was that I had a very rigid structure. Yeah. But the point is, I, as an athlete, was able to get through that experience. Yeah, which is sometimes more than just being a student. It was that's my point. It was horrific. I was training like 3-4 hours a day. The emotional, physical drain was profound. Yeah. And then on top of that, I was going to class, whereas the other students were just going to class. So when people write off the student athlete as, oh, you're just a jock or you're just this, it's kind of like, do you understand what happens in my day? Because I am doing what other people are doing, and then take away any capacity
4 or 5 more hours of physical exertion. Right. And at 8 o'clock at night, I'm done, like completely done. And they're I remember I was sleeping one night in the dorms. I was sleeping and it was like 1:30 a.m. I get a knock on the door. I'm like, what? Is the devil here? Like, what the hell is it? So I get up, and there was this girl and this other girl, Francesca, and this, I can't remember, it was like Sam or something. They're like, do you have a measuring cup? Because they were trying to bake some bread. They had gotten a toaster oven. Yeah. And it was like, measure what? I have to be up in 4 hours. Totally. And they're like, oh, were you sleeping? I'm like, are you insane? Yes. It's 1 a.m. And you're baking? And they're like, we'll come back later. I'm like, don't come back ever. Don't, never. I don't want your bread.
Right. I don't want your bread. Yes, but that was what was going on in the freshman dorms. Yeah. So it's kind of like, to get somebody who can hold it together.
Well, we're not there yet, Matt. He's just a senior still. So we'll see. We'll see. I mean, I feel like what he's managed over the last year is a pretty good predictor of him being able to handle it. But I don't know. He might not. We'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, but I bet you're betting on him.
I am betting on him because, like I said, the opportunities, the experiences that we've provided for him, and that he has succeeded in or with, I think he'll be okay. He'll have bumps, of course, just like every college kid, but I think he'll be okay. I think he'll be able to manage it, and he's pretty laser focused, and he's got a really solid head on his shoulders, so he I think, when he messes up, he'll right the train.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'm betting on him too.
Yeah.
It'll be a good time. Listen to me. It's been 2 hours.
Yeah. Has it really? That's crazy. Did we talk about anything of substance?
Who cares?
It was fun, nonetheless.
It's a great time.
Yeah,
Listen,
totally.
thank you for coming, and thank you for your perspectives on the union and early education and, raising a student athlete.
Yeah.
So look, if people don't find that substantive, that's on them.
That's fine.
I don't
okay.
really mind too much.
Yeah. Thank
I
you
just
for the
appreciate the
opportunity.
conversation. Yes, anytime. Let's do it again in a couple months.
Sure.
Thanks, everybody.